Hey guys, one more book review. It's this short story collection with this wonderful little cover there. It's called The Street of Crocodiles and Other Stories by Bruno Schulz. And Bruno Schulz led a really interesting life, and he actually drew this etching as well. Bruno Schulz was born in 1892 in Poland, and he's Jewish. And as it turns out, he was actually killed under really weird circumstances by. It actually turns out that two SS officers in 1942 were getting in a fight, and one of the SS officers killed the other one's house Jew, who sort of did work for him, did his, just things around the house, maybe finances, maybe took care of other things. This apparently happened quite often, according to the introduction of the book. So, in retaliation, that SS officer killed the other one's house Jew, and his house Jew happened to be Bruno Schulz. Bruno Schulz is not, very widely recognized, but that's kind of a shame, because this short story collection is really, really impressive, and I think this is pretty much all the fiction that he ever wrote, which is in about 330 pages or so. But the interesting thing about Bruno Schulz is, I told you that he etched this this thing on the cover here, but there's also just some sketches throughout the book, and let me see if I can. And I love them because they're just as weird as the stories themselves. So, there's one. And let me just show you one more or so. There's another one. This is of a guy flying around. So he actually illustrated his own stories. He was an art teacher, and he was actually doing some repair work around this Nazi SS officer's house. And so he was murdered in the streets of, I think, his Jewish ghetto, where he was staying during World War II in 1942. He was 50 years old when he died. I kind of stammer and hedge, really, writing a review for this book in kind of the same way that I was hesitant to write reviews of really other great artists of the short story, like Isaac Bashevis Singer and his collection Gimple the Fool and other stories, which you can find on my channel, and also Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber and other stories, which is also just a superb collection. I read this over a period of time, which is probably a little bit too long for any short story collection. Probably 4 or 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And because of this, I kind of lost the sense of the stories as a whole, even though if you do read them, you find out that there are themes which run throughout that let it resemble something more like a novel. The stories themselves are just weird, wonderful, dreamlike, fantastical. These are sort of the only words I can come up with. They center around a boy, his parents, especially his eccentric, bird-loving father, who sells textiles out of his house, and who occasionally comes to resemble this sort of mystagogue crossed with an archimandrite crossed with a heresiarch. He's a sort of full of this esoteric knowledge. Uh, you also meet his sister named Adela, and various other family members that sort of pop up and make periodic appearances through the story. If you follow the action of the stories in order, I think the father turns into a bird at least once because he loves birds and he's really into them and likes looking at pictures of them. But I think he definitely recovers his human form. But I mean, just weird things like that happen throughout the stories. And and come to think of it, I mean, there are things like that which happen in the stories of, Angela Carter and Singer too. So there's sort of more connections than just the fact that I'm sort of, really had to dig and think to come up with something interesting to say. There's not really a magical realism element like you're familiar with magical realism from Latin American lit, but the element of the supernatural, of the fantastical, of the grotesquerie, that's all there, and it's just wonderful to read about. Schulz is really interested in seasons. 5 of the stories either have the word season in them or they name a particular season, like autumn. There's a couple with autumn in it. There's one with summer. And he describes them with just this great enthusiasm. In fact, the only way to read them might be to read a couple at a time over a period of a few days and not at long sittings. I think the language is a little bit too rich, and there's really such a thing as too much of a good thing. The stories are littered with sentences like this. I'll give you 2 examples, just so you get a rough idea. Quote, "You know that moment when summer, so recently buoyant and vigorous, universal summer hugging to itself all things imaginable, people, events, objects, one day sustains a barely perceptible injury. The sun still blazes dense and copious, the landscape still wield the classical magisterial flourish bequeathed to this season by the genius of Poussin, but strange to report, we return from a morning stroll oddly weary and jejune." That's from one of the last stories in the collection, called Autumn. And here's another one. Quote, "Everyone knows in a run of normal uneventful years that great eccentric time begets sometimes other years, different prodigal years, which like a 6th smallest toe grow into a 13th freak month. We use the word freak deliberately because the 13th month only rarely reaches maturity, and like a child conceived late in its mother's life, it lags behind in growth. It is a hunchback month, a half-witted shoot, more tentative than real." So obviously the language here is beautiful, impressive, not really showy or lavish, but just really something special. And I think you can have a glut of it. It's sort of full of this sort of Kabbalistic essence of things that are revealed only behind the veil of reality, and that reality is just that, a veil that hides things instead of uncovers things. Especially in the character of the father, you get that. But as I said, sometimes language like that really can be, too much of a good thing. But if you like stories like the ones I mentioned, or if those quotes interest you at all, you would probably really, really enjoy these stories. This is a writer that deserves a lot more attention than he's ever had in the United States. Bruno Schulz's The Street of Crocodiles and Other Stories.